Welcome back to another episode of Growth Marketers Podcast. I'm Samuel Timothy.
And I'm Taylor Rowe. Today was another installment of our Best in Class series where we dive into key characteristics of top performing organizations and what makes them tick. We dove into kind of a second part of our sales portion of Best in Class series. So we talked about sales organizations, tools, technologies that they use, processes that they use, reports and metrics that they're able to capture and measure, and what best-in-class organizations are doing from a coaching and training perspective to make sure that their reps are always performing at a high level. Let's dive into the episode. Please give us a like, subscribe to the podcast, and let's go. All right, welcome back. We have another installment of our Best in Class series today for you. And today we're continuing on sales. So we're going to dive into a couple of different characteristics of best-in-class sales organizations. We're going to start with technology, and then we're going to get into some of the different tools that their best-in-class organizations are using, what they're doing from a reporting perspective, and what best-in-class organizations, sales organizations, are doing from a training and coaching perspective. So let's start things off, Sam, with technology. When you think about sales technology, obviously CRM is the biggest one. So what does a best-in-class sales organization CRM look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing you need to keep in mind is not necessarily the brand that you would choose, but could you say this is the single source of truth, right? Can everything that around the customers that you're going after, the prospects and the customers and their life cycle stages and where they may be in the purchase journey, what are some of the next steps to get that customer moved to the decision-making stage? Is that all can be found in that single source of truth? So I would say the number one thing to keep in mind is you have to choose a platform that's going to be appropriate for your specific industry and application or use case, and that it would become the go-to source for everything that you need to know about your customers and your prospects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another piece of that, right, is we don't have tools just for the sake of having tools. Like you said, you have access to all the data. The data is accurate. The data is clean. But at the end of the day, you need adoption, right? If we talk about a best-in-class sales organization, it's not that they have a CRM or, as you said, they have top-of-the-line CRM tools, HubSpot or Salesforce or something like that. It's, are they using it? And is that technology an enabler and not necessarily an obstacle or forcing them to do double entry, right? So like, is that automating business processes? Is it illuminating gaps in sales processes? Is it helping you prioritize leads? Is it helping you segment those leads? I mean, at the end of the day, you should be able to look at an increase in productivity and production from, the sales rep by implementing a CRM, right? So I would say if we were to sum that up, right, the best in class CRM turns a one person, quota into, 1.5 or two times quota, right? Whatever that number is, because of the, as you said, single source of truth capability. But at the end of the day, it provides the right insights and actions to enable those reps.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is pretty critical, like enabler, not an obstacle, because a lot of times we've seen if you're making the life of the rep difficult, and it only becomes an obstacle for them to actually use it, right? And if everything has to be manually done. So if they're making a call or sending an email or having to remember to take a note about a conversation they had, if they're having to do all of those things manually, it's a lot difficult to do. But if you have a solution that actually helps them automate some of those things without them having to think about it, it actually, the adoption is going to be a lot simpler. And I think when we get to, maybe we can talk a little bit more about some use cases of how we use it and how we've seen some of our own clients who are in the best in class, we would consider them as best in class companies, how they're leveraging it, right? So in the past, everything had to be manually entered. So if you're sending an email to a prospect, you couldn't have tracked it directly into a CRM where you can actually see that conversation history and thread. So rep would have to say, I sent an email, here's the copy of it. But there are technology that's available today that can actually sync with your email provider or engine, and then obviously be tracking that entire conversation history right into your CRM so you can see that. And so if in the future some other rep had to step in and cover that territory or that account, they can also see the transactional conversations or any sort of interactions that the customer had with our organization. So
Yeah.
that would be just a simple use case of how you can empower your rep and not create more tasks to do. Like then I would say non-revenue generating activities.
Right. Yeah, and cross-departmental as well. I mean, if you have a service ticket or multiple, you have multiple reps selling into, one big account, working multiple angles, multiple, prospects, contacts, whatever that may be, all those sorts of things, right? Like you mentioned, you want that full funnel visibility across departments, not just so if a rep leaves or is out sick, someone can replace, do their job, right? But so that rep can then see the full picture of what's going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the other thing we've also seen implemented, and we even use it in our own organization. So if you're making calls into those accounts, or if you're having conference calls, whether through Zoom or any other video conferencing tools, leveraging integrations to your CRM that can actually also capture those call conversations, append that against the contact in the company record, and maybe even have transcriptions and also the recordings of it, right? Show up right in that company's contact or company record. So you don't have to manually enter, oh, I had a sales calls with this person. Here's all the things that we talked about. That also getting added and stored in it. So CRM has to become that single source of truth and bring any and every other interactions that are maybe happening outside of those. The tool itself is also getting stored into CRM.
Yeah. So, obviously getting the insights into what's happening, all the interactions, behavioral characteristics, that's one thing. The next step is then the ability to segment and then act upon the ability to prioritize those leads and activities, right? So how are best-in-class organizations prioritizing leads and using, organizing their day, I would say, in terms of tasks and task queues in order to execute the highest priority activities?
Yeah, I mean, this would also comes down to the organization's overall objectives and what they're trying to go after, right? So there are organizations that may be just organizing their territories based on maybe target accounts or based on specific industries some certain reps are going after. There are organizations that primarily generate most of their leads through inbound, so they're being funneled opportunities and conversations and feeding to our reps. All of those things will kind of determine how do you prioritize and segment your contacts. But as an organization, if you are doing mostly generating inbound leads, and if you're getting those leads coming to you and you're assigning those leads based on some sort of a criteria that's established and documented, then you need to know, hey, are these conversations or the leads that I'm being handed to, right? Are they engaged with our marketing activities, whatever the marketing efforts? And then also, are they engaging with my own sales activities, whether I'm sending emails or making calls and leaving messages? Are they engaging on all those things? And then if so, using some sort of a behavioral metrics to prioritize those leads based on whoever might be the most likely to want to move forward. So that would be a simple thing that I would say one way you can prioritize it. I mean, there's so many other criteria that you can use, company size, revenue, the product or service that they're interested in, and then whether or not they submitted a form that's more like a request or quote or schedule a sales conversations versus someone who may have just looked at some sort of a content assets or something like that. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered when you're thinking of prioritizing a contact or a prospect.
Sure. Okay. So we have the data, right? We have, it's a single source of truth. We have the ability to segment the data. The data is clean, data is organized, and we're acting upon that data. So what other facets or functionalities of a best-in-class CRM, make that a best-in-class?
I think we touched on like data visualization. I think, like we said, like in terms of like function? Are you referring to like the functionality side, or you're just looking at?
Yeah, I just mean, yeah, once we get into, okay, so we have the data, how do we move into enabling our sales reps? What other tools are they using? Automation, those type of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are especially in a high volume sort of a sales scenario, and you're having a lot of writing or sending similar type of messages, giving them tools that actually can create templates and sequences, or even sales playbooks right inside the CRM, so they don't have to leave the platform to go find a Google Doc to find what they need to do next in that sales conversation, right? So if you're giving those sort of tools, whether it be built right into your CRM or accessible right inside the CRM, that could actually make the life of that rep a lot easier. I think we kind of touched on possibly call recording and transcribing the call being one of those things where not having to manually write what the conversation history was and taking action items based off of that conversation. If those could be simplified or automated right inside the CRM, that also make the reps extremely proficient and efficient. That's what best-in-class companies should be thinking about implementing.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think automation is big, and obviously almost all CRMs have some sort of automation, whether it's, prospecting or once they're in the funnel. And I think automation should be used to build consistency in outputs and not necessarily remove the personalization, right? So what I mean by that is like, it's not necessarily like, okay, we have this automation, so we can just send out 1,000 prospect emails and, nothing is customized, nothing, and then once somebody's in the funnel, they get all these automated, emails. That's not what I mean by automation. It's like we just talked about, you have all this data. Let's build some consistency in activity and outputs from all of our reps so that every time I move a deal into this stage, A, B, and C happens, right? And every time before I can, move on to this next type of call, I need to have X, Y, and Z information. Every time, I want to move to agreement sent or follow up or something like that, these tasks are added to my, high priority task queue, whatever that may be. It's automation to enable the rep, help them close more deals, and yes, save time on menial tasks that doesn't make a lot of sense, but at the end of the day, it helps them close more, and it creates consistency in output to not say, well, we have this one rep who, Josh, who closes, at 20 times the rest of the reps, and we don't know why, right? You should be able to have consistency in terms of what information, what kind of conversations they're having, like you said, in terms of playbooks at each stage. Input in terms of data that is required to move to the next stage would tell me that, hey, everyone's asking the same questions through the discovery period. Follow-up frequency based on tasks and email automation. So everything should be consistent across your organization, because what that's going to do is not to say that, our reps are robots, but that's going to start giving us actual data that we can act on, and we can say, okay, here's the problem in our sales process. Here's where we can improve on. Here's what certain reps can improve on. If everyone's just doing their own thing, and we see this at a lot of organizations when they're trying to implement technology, all the reps have different process. They store data in different places. They take notes differently. They meet with the clients differently, different frequencies. They conduct, intro or discovery calls differently. So there's no consistency in activity or output. And then that outcome is, all over the place. And so there's no way to, like you said, to coach your reps or to train them or to improve the process, because there really is no process.
Yeah, I mean, as human beings, we have a hard time being consistent personally ourselves, right? Like, so if there are multiple people, they're all doing different ways of things, like it's going to make it even more difficult. So yeah, having some functionality within the CRM that enables our reps to be consistent, I think that's super critical for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into prospecting, right? So prospecting is a big piece of a lot of sales organizations, and certainly best-in-class organizations are, as we talked about in some of the marketing segments, generating a majority of their new business from inbound marketing sourced leads. But at the same time, you can never stop prospecting, never stop selling, right? And every sales coach, every sales trainer will tell you the same thing, that you should always be prospecting, right? So from a prospecting perspective, what are best-in-class organizations doing inside their CRM? What tools do they have access to? What data do they have access to?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the CRM already has a component that can enable, like you said, right, some automation for whether it be prospecting function or just regular sales activities, maybe leveraging that. If not, certainly having some sort of a third party tool that can give them a cadence that they follow. Going back to your point of consistency, I think the number one problem in with any rep that's doing prospecting is it's not a consistent thing that they do, right? They don't wake up every morning and saying, I'm going to prospect into 25 account every morning. But if you have a sales enablement tool that is specifically designed for a prospecting function, and it can actually talk to your CRM and can give that rep some sort of a standardized cadence that they follow, whether it be a 5-touch, 7-touch sequence or whatnot, to stay in front of the prospect that they're going after, that will actually help in terms of figuring out what is the bottleneck. Is it just a consistency of output, or is it the targeting? Is it the messaging? Is it the offer? Is it the call to action? What could be the reason why we're not getting the results that we want, or why are we getting the success we have, and where can we point that to, right? And then leveraging that to improve the organization as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think the data piece of that, right, is like we talked about earlier, is like there's implicit and explicit data, right? So we should have, as a best-in-class organization, we should have access to data of all of these prospects if they've had any interaction with our organization in the past, if they're on our website, if they're downloading ebooks, attending webinars, if we've had an open sales conversation with them in the past. Like, that's kind of basic stuff. But we should also have some data, enrichment and data enhancement, right? So we're adding additional information around the company size, revenue, key employees, all those type of things. Particularly if it's a quote unquote cold outreach, right? If we're doing true prospecting into accounts that we've never had interactions in the past, this shouldn't be something that is done completely manual by the rep, of sourcing the leads, filtering them by the ICPs, finding the right contact and decision maker, getting their account information. Best in class organizations are integrated with tools like Zoom Info and these type of tools that give you all of that information and have some sort of a process in place to consistently get batches of those leads that they're going after. If you're prospecting into a certain industry, we should have consistency in terms of that messaging, which means we need to reach out to a lot of similar people, right? Not necessarily completely all over the board when we're prospecting. So that ability to collect that data, enhance that data on a consistent basis is really, I think, what changes a lot of organizations when they're talking about an outreach and prospecting campaign, to become really truly best in class.
Yeah, and again, I think any sort of tools that actually makes the reps more efficient, right? Like you said, sometimes they go, chasing down, trying to go find out what industry are they in, how many employees they have, or even trying to guess the email addresses or any of those things, or trying to go scrape the web to go find a phone number for the company. We shouldn't have to we shouldn't have to have our reps waste their valuable time to do that. They should be spending their time in front of the prospect, having more sales conversation as opposed to doing non-revenue generating activities. So any enabler, sales enablement tool that provides that data and insights, preferably right inside the CRM that they're functioning, working in, that I think would make that organization as a whole best in class.
All right. So if you were building a sales team, a sales department from the ground up, and you had all the resources in the world, and you had the tools, the technology, everything that we've talked about, and you had A players in terms of reps, what would your dashboard look like as a sales leader? What would the reporting look like? What metrics are important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reporting dashboard need to have basically kind of break it up into two core categories. I think certainly activities does not equal to outcome, but activities does lead to outcome, right? So you certainly need to have some sort of a leading indicators that shows all the activities that reps are doing, or the entire sales department is doing, right? Whether it be the calls and the emails and the conversations, the number of deals being created, the number of touches to an account. All of those are like leading indicators of success, right? So you want to have some sort of a dashboard that shows, on a department level and preferably also on an individual contributor level that shows all their activities. And then also the lag meshes, which is like the number of opportunities closed won and the deals, right? The cash collected. So you wouldn't want to have that as a dashboard as well, that for the whole organization, maybe for the leadership to look at, like, hey, how are we doing as a company? Where's our target goals, and are we on track to reach our revenue targets and whatnot? So those are two main ways that I would say I would create a dashboard to kind of see the health of the organization from a sales standpoint.
And how have you seen best-in-class organizations use that dashboard, use that visual, data feedback to coach their reps? Like, what does that coaching schedule look like at these top-tier organizations?
Yeah, so if you're hitting your targets and your outcome is there, right, which is at the end of the day is the revenue. If that's actually happening, then you're on target and you're doing really well. But if that's not being met, then you need to start looking at your leading indicators, which is really comes down to the activities, right? So if you're not booking enough opportunities, then you need to work backwards and say, well, what's actually happening? Are we not having enough quality meetings? If we're not having meetings, then we need to say, well, are we not feeding our reps with quality inbound leads? Or if they're not getting inbound leads, then we need to be asking ourselves, well, are they doing enough prospecting into the right accounts to create the interest and demand to have conversation with decision makers, right? So kind of going backwards to figure out where could be the issue. But if you don't have visibility into those things, then you're just working in the dark. You don't have any idea what could be the actual cause for why we're not hitting the targets, right? And you can't just wake up as a sales leader at the end of a quarter and say, well, shoot, we had a target, we're not hitting it. How many deals can we close this last 3 weeks of the quarter? That's just not going to happen. Every day matters, and every little activity that leads to that ultimate outcome matters. So you do need to be monitoring across the board the entire sales organization, where all your reps are, activities, and then also how it's impacting the top line goals.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think, the best-in-class organizations really know their numbers and understand the numbers, and like you said, know what levers to push and pull in order to improve each of those metrics, right? So if we're not having enough leads in the funnel, if we're not having enough, not big enough conversion rate from, point A to point B, if we're not closing enough, like you can kind of know where you need, how many meetings you need in order to hit your number. But at the same time, you need to be intuitive enough and to kind of read between the lines, right? And understand, truly the pulse of what is going on in the sales rep, right? In the sales process. So a lot of times, you look at the close rates and you say, okay, well, we need to do a better job of the proposals, right? But like best-in-class organizations know that a lot of times that we're not closing because we're not doing a good enough job in the discovery call, the intro call, of really truly understanding the client's pain and decision-making factors and who's involved, budgets, timeline, those type of things. So knowing your numbers, knowing your metrics, but having, I think that is call recording and, consistency and outputs, like we said, in terms of required fields to move along in the process, like those type of things can really help hone in on where in those metrics we need to tweak and we need to improve. And I agree with, like you said, at the end of the day, sales has always been and always will be results oriented. So when you get those reps that are crushing it and closing, like, not to say they don't need as much coaching, but they're doing it. They're hitting their numbers, right? So if they don't have some of those leading indicators that we talked about, but they're selling, that's sometimes can be overlooked, right? So I think you want to look short term, long term. Obviously, you need to know, like, you have a full pipeline and all those type of things, and know why those deals are closing. But at the end of the day, if we're just summing it up, it's like best-in-class organizations, they sell, right? They consistently sell. They drive new business, and there's no excuses. Like we said, whether it's inbound, outbound, we have to have consistency in activities, continually, right, forever, in order for us to close more business. Yeah, and I think probably the final piece of that in terms of coaching would be maybe accountability, right? Everyone at the organization needs accountability. We talked about this way back at the very first installment of this Best in Class series about creating a culture of accountability. I think it's more prominent in sales because, again, everyone is accountable to a number, but everyone within the sales organization is accountable, right? So if you take that kind of extreme ownership level of accountability, and you say, if I'm a sales leader and we missed the mark, like, I take that as a personal failure. If I'm a sales rep and we didn't close this deal, I take that as a personal failure. If you have that attitude going into it, and you're consistently looking for improvement and self-reflecting on the process and what's happening, at the end of the day, that's probably more powerful than any of the tools and technologies that we've talked about. It's just that desire to win and to improve.
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about in today's world we're living in, in the past maybe there was a lot of emotion involved coaching, right? Like the rep is not producing, so you're kind of you're frustrated,
Sure.
and a lot of it is like, hey, you need to just do more activities. But today, with the access to, like you said, if you have technology that's actually giving you a lot of visibility into the activity of the reps, or you have call recording and call intelligence sort of tools that actually is listening into the calls of the reps, and then actually saying like, hey, what percentage of the time the reps are talking, what percentage of the time the prospect is talking, and how many times do we ask really open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, and how many pain points were brought up by the prospect that we overlooked in terms of digging deeper. So if you have such insights from the sales conversations, then you can be very, very targeted in your coaching and helping your reps get better in their skill and craft, and not just, hey, I feel like you're just not doing enough activity, that's why you're not closing, right? There could be a lot of other areas of improvement, right? Because like I said, it's activity doesn't always equal to outcome, but it is a requirement for outcome. But you also need to be figuring out what are some areas where this rep could improve, right? I think there's the whole concept of willingness versus skill, right? Skill versus willingness. Somebody might be willing to do the activities, but they just don't have the skills that's needed to do it at a high, excellent level, right? So if they are a pretty junior rep, haven't had a lot of experience, interacting with the senior level prospects, and if you're not doing a great job of having equal stature and setting up, call agendas and setting requirements for the prospect to follow through, if those things are not being done, all right, reps could be failing, and you're not doing a great job in coaching that rep to get better every day.
Sure. All right. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you learned something. Please give us a like, subscribe to the podcast. It really helps out. Share it with a friend or a colleague, and give us a comment if you're on YouTube or a platform that allows comments. Give us a comment on topics for future episodes or any feedback that you have on this episode. So, again, we appreciate it, and tune in next week for a new episode.
Growth Marketers is brought to you by OneIMS, helping you reach new heights through integrated marketing. One world, one web, OneIMS.